many versions, sometimes for good, sometimes for evil. Lady Macbeth plays upon her husband's love to force them to commit regicide and kill lots of people. Shakespeare's plays are typically divided into histories, comedies, and tragedies. Okay, the comedies are almost always romantic. What makes it a comedy is people live at the end, and the tragedies, people die at the end. Okay, so the comedy has an inexorable move towards positive, happy ending, and the tragedy has an inexorable move towards death of the main characters. But some of those tragedies have romantic themes built into them. Sometimes it's the fatal flaw which results in the tragedy. And the histories were simply that. It was Shakespeare telling a historic story, obviously from the history of England, and there were among his earliest plays talking about the Wars of the Roses and the historic functions. Some of his Caesar and Cleopatra, Julius Caesar is mostly about what happened in Rome after Caesar's death. It has some romantic elements in it. But the romantic themes are common of the plays that are popular now. They were not necessarily the most popular plays back then. So the trivia question, what was the most popular play in Shakespeare's time? The most often performed? And this is a hard one. I said I always ask easy questions because you've probably never seen it. The play is Titus Andronicus. There is a movie called Titus with Anthony Hopkins, which powerfully tells the story. It is one of Shakespeare's goriest plays. In this play, a woman is raped, and so that she cannot reveal the people who rape her, they cut out her tongue, so that she cannot point to them or write. They cut off her hands, and she spends the rest of the play, and I don't forget they put out her eyes. Putting out eyes was a popular thing in Shakespeare's, but I don't think they did this to her. So she spends the rest of the play on stage, and with no hands. We'll use those little branches for hands. The guys who did this are punished in the end by being brought to a banquet in which at the end of the banquet, just before they kill, they are told that what they just ate was their children. Yum. Talk about revenge, okay? Because she figures out, all right, here's the device. She doesn't have a tongue and she doesn't have hands, but she can still hold something and write in the sand with it. And that's how she reveals who did it, and the good guys kind of win. I was very, very popular in Shakespeare's time, demanded by his, okay.
Did he direct his plays?
We don't know for sure, okay? We don't know for sure that plays had the same role that we had as director now. Most plays were produced in London at the time of Shakespeare by a company of actors who hung together. So the same bunch of guys would do all the plays in repertory. They would frequently put on 5 different plays in a week. Okay, it was not, we're gonna run Romeo and Juliet the next 2 weeks. It'll be Tuesday it's Romeo and Juliet, Thursday it's Titus, Monday it's Titus again, so they would just do them over and over again.
Now, was this a career for them, or was this a hobby?
What we know about Shakespeare is that he had a home in Stratford, and he lived most of his life in London. Okay, anybody been to England? You've been to Stratford?
Yeah, we were saying we've been to as well.
How far does it, you've been to what they told you was?
Well, yes, right.
Okay, because one of the things about the people in Stratford is they lie like rugs.
Well,
Okay.
because they have the affiliation.
They lie like rugs because they, they'll show you his grave, they'll show you where his mother lived, and they're all lies, okay? because they forgot, because they didn't pay any attention to him for over 100 years. And 100 years after his death, they had a celebration, Stratford, the big fair, and they made up which his house was. Okay, so I'm sorry if you paid a lot to see it. How long did it take you to get from London to Stratford?
Like a long time.
Yeah.
By bus, probably?
I don't know.
2 or 3 hours.
1922 Bentley.
2 or 3 hours.
Oh,
2 hours.
long way.
Okay. Distance from here to Boston, maybe. Distance from here to New York, a little more. Okay. In Shakespeare's time, 3 days. Okay. By horseback, if you rode hard, 5 days by coach, which meant 4 overnight stays. So to think of Shakespeare's commuting from London to Stratford didn't happen. Okay. May have gone to Stratford when there was plague going on in London. They shut London down a couple of times in his life. Now he had a wife in London, in Stratford. There's no record of her ever going to London. Okay. He had 3 children. He had a boy and 2 girls. The boy's name was, trivia question, Hamnet, with an N. Okay. And after Hamnet died, he wrote the play Hamlet about the son who is angry at his mother for being unfaithful to his father. I wonder what was going on in Stratford. Okay. What we know about Shakespeare's relationship with his wife is that she lived in Stratford, he lived in London. They had 3 kids. Okay. What? I'm sorry?
He left her, so she's gonna do what you're around for.
And so when he died, his will left everything to his oldest daughter, actually to her husband, and he left his wife, ready for this, the second best bed. Well, everything in his house, his farm that he had owned eventually. So was it a hobby? If it was a hobby, it paid for by a farm that he didn't own when he was a young man, and which was in Stratford. But everything in the house went to his daughter except for the second best bed that he gave his wife, which she apparently didn't have the right to live in the house anymore. So it's, and he gave more to his fellow actors in his acting company. He gave them rings and jewelry in his will. It was not that he was a poor man. He wrote dozens of plays and over 50 major poems. It was more than a hobby for him. Now this is assuming that it was one guy. We don't really know for sure.
Yeah, well, my question was more like the time period, like those guys that hung out together. Is that what they did for their living?
That's what they did for their living. That was, they were disreputable. They were outside the wall of the city. I don't know if you know, London was a walled city, and the theater district is outside the wall, along with the bars and the prostitutes. So that's where the actors were disreputable. They were disreputable because they were neither nobility, nor were they connected to a productive business like trade, nor did they own land and were not farmers, therefore. So they were kind of outside the pale. And disreputable is the right term for them. So they, but this was pretty much what provided for them. And in the case of Shakespeare's company eventually became the Queen's Men. They were sponsored by Queen Elizabeth, and then became King James Men. They were sponsored by the King, and so the palace gave them stipends to work on. By the time he died, it was probably true that he had reached solid middle class. Certainly not royalty. He was not knighted. He was not valued by the throne that much. And within 15 years of his death, London closed all theaters. They were taken. London's politically was taken over by Cromwell. There was a revolution in London. They killed King Charles II, and they put Cromwell in. He was a Puritan, and he decided theater was not religious, and theaters were closed for 40 years in London.
For
40 years.
40? Wow, that's a
Right.
long
Not
time.
until the 1700s did they reopen the theaters, and then the Restoration, the English Restoration, theater was when Shakespeare became popular, in retrospect. Okay, any other positives? Okay, negatives. Once you get it was one that I picked up already.
Yeah, the language.
So
is
you gonna let you
just-
guys go first?
Well, that's our top one. We just didn't understand the language, storylines. And then you start tuning out.
That, you know, that is very insightful.
I do.
You know, you tune out. I went to see two productions of King Lear in the same week, a couple of years ago. One was put on by the Yale Repertory Company. It was sponsored by the Yale Repertory Company. It was put on by professional actors from mostly TV and movies. Names you would recognize, but I won't tell you because of what I'm about to say about them. The second one was put on Lincoln Center. Chris Plummer played Lear, and when I went to see I saw the Yale production first, and I sat in the third row center. That's primo seats. They are the best seats in the house, except for the front row of the balcony, which I think is slightly better because you don't get the actors to spin on you. And your first row, second row, third row orchestra, you are close enough to see the makeup, and sometimes that takes some of the magic away. But what they call the royal box area, the first center of the balcony, perfect seats. But anyway, I'm way up front in the third row, and the play King Lear, just briefly, is about an aged king, not a real historic character, who has 3 daughters. And he decides to test their love by offering to divide his kingdom to them, but first they have to tell him how much they love him. And the 2 daughters who go first suck up big time, and they I love you, Father, like nobody else and everything. And the third daughter says, I love you as much as it is appropriate to love a father. And someday I will love a husband. I have to leave room in my heart for him. Okay? And the old man goes bananas and exiles her and throws her away. Instead of dividing the kingdom in 2, he divides it in 2, and then he retires. And he decides he's going to retire and live with his 2 daughters. They don't think so. So he goes to live with his first daughter, and she fires his army, she fires his servants. She decides it's not convenient for him to stay till next month, go to visit my sister. The sister says, it wasn't time for you to come visit me. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Okay. But in any event, and the play resolves itself eventually with Lear discovering his truly faithful daughter. And this is how sharper than a serpent's tongue it is to have a faithful child. But he finds the faithful child, and she dies in his arms. And then he dies. He carries her out, and then he dies. So so in order to follow now I know this play. Right? I've acted in this play, and I'm in the Yale Rep Theater in the third row, digging in to really enjoy it. And their pretense was it was an all-black cast. And the play, it was not set in England, it was set in pre-Columbian Central America. All right, it probably wouldn't have been an African cast, but, you know, with suspension of disbelief, all right? So, and because they got to have great music and great costumes and feathers and bright colors and dancing, and it was really exciting. They finally get to the point where the opening scene where the 3 daughters come together, and you get to discover which daughter is which, because they talk to each other, and I can't hear them. Third row, center. And I'm thinking, thank God I didn't have the royal box seats. I wouldn't even know they were on stage. Okay, well, I could see they were on stage. By the third act, I mean, there's a whole thing about bastards and about loyal natural sons and unloyal natural sons, and you can't figure out who is who because you can't hear the actors. And I tuned out. Just like you said, the phrase tune out. And if you can't follow it, you can't get it. It is about the language. Shakespeare is about the language, if you can't hear the language. The next 2 days later, I'm in Manhattan at Lincoln Center, and I have the worst seat in the house. I am upper balcony, way over to one side, not center. I am in a seat that the theater is raked so heavily that I'm really not sitting, because my knees would be through the shoulders of the guy in front of me. So I have to prop my seat up, and I'm sitting on the back of this seat with my head leaning against the back wall of the theater. And before the first act is out, I'm in tears. All right, I'm a mush. I cry at the drop of a hat. But it absolutely got to me, okay, the tragedy of what was unfolding got to me. And I was moved, and I just loved it. One more example. I saw an Othello at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is a great place to go see Shakespeare, if for no other reason than it's not Broadway, the seats are cheaper, it's a really great theater, and they have really good companies play there. Except for this one that I saw, where the Othello lasted 4.5 hours. And by 3 hours, I'm saying, kill the bitch, I want to leave.
I'll do it myself.
I'll volunteer. It shouldn't be that long. Professional company, it's so disappointing. Tuning out is a big problem. Okay, what else?
The plots are just so disturbing sometimes.
Tell me what that means, Sherry.
Disturbing, dark, negative, gory, gruesome. Should I go on?
All right, unlike modern drama.
And you know what? Modern drama that have those plots, I don't care for.
Pardon?
No,
Yeah,
even
dark, gruesome,
Reservoir Dogs.
Oh,
Makes me want to-
gory. So
Reservoir
why do you
Dogs.
think a playwright writes like that?
For the audience.
Because it sells.
Because it
Exactly.
sells, of course, there's a
Quentin
huge.
Tarantino sells.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's, you know, I hear the criticism. It determines your choice of what plays you go to see, and you vote with your feet and that sort of thing. Anything else from this side? Negatives?
We remember it as being a lot of work. It was always a school chore to have to read Shakespeare and take notes.
So somebody makes a decision at a curriculum level. That I think I heard the phrase, you can't grow up unless you know Shakespeare. Okay, I heard that somebody say that.
Yeah.
All right,
Sure.
it's got like a rite of passage.
Yes.
Okay, how could we call it an English curriculum if there was no Shakespeare in it? And so then what do?
Kill it.
They kill it. They give it to a person who is not necessarily prepared to teach it. Or doesn't have a methodology for teaching it that will excite the kids. The first Shakespeare play I read in high school, my first year, was Julius Caesar, as a freshman in a Catholic high school in Queens. And the way we did Julius Caesar was it was in our big book. We had a big book. Julius Caesar was in the big book. And I don't remember if it was the whole play, to be honest with you, because I tuned out. Because the way they did it was, you read the first line, then you read the next part, then you read the next, then you read the next part, then you read the next. Doesn't matter if you're the same character that he is. Okay, you're gonna read it around the room. That's supposed to keep everybody engaged. But, you know, understand that it's the blind leading the insane. Because you, as a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, I didn't know about Julius Caesar. I didn't understand the context. I didn't know anything about Shakespeare. And I stumbled over the words, as did every one of my cohort. And the professor is sitting up there, next, that's his job, next. And so it's remarkable. When I actually got later in that year to see a Shakespearean play with real people in it, I couldn't believe it was the same thing. Okay, lots of work. You make it lots of work and a school requirement. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't be in the curriculum. I advocate for good teaching. Okay, and I'm not saying that English teachers are bad teachers. I'm saying lots of them are not prepared. Now, I'll give you this speech. What's wrong with math education in the United States?
With math?
Math education. Most elementary school teachers don't like math. There are very few math majors who go into elementary school, and most elementary school teachers have 1 or 2 math courses in their college career that they suffered through because they had to do it, okay? And so the job of a teacher to instill love for mathematics in their first and second graders is unlikely to happen, because what the teacher would rather teach is reading. And I heard the argument, reading is everything if you know how to read, and I get that, okay, I really do. But the idea is the same with Shakespeare. If it's going to be in the curriculum, require that people know how to do it, okay? And I've worked with 6-year-olds who get Shakespeare, okay? 6-year-olds who can do, now they don't sit through a whole play, 6-year-old. But Midsummer Night's Dream, working with a group of middle school students on Midsummer Night's Dream is a joy. They get that plot. They get running away into the forest. They get loving you one day and you the next day. It's their life, okay? And they really get it, and then they discover that in the language. They discover it in the language, and it's just magic. I had a troupe of high school kids I was working with a number of years ago when a Midsummer Night's Dream movie came out, and it was really an ugly production. Puck was a middle-aged guy with hairy armpits. It just, there was lots of it ugly. And so, but of course, all my kids went to see it, and they came back in a group. You know, this is a group of like 14, 15-year-old girls, and they're all about what did they hate about it? We hated it. What did you hate about it? All the cuts. They hated the scenes that the director didn't leave in. Okay, because some of their favorite pieces weren't in the movie. And that's, you know.
I would imagine that, and it's just a guess, that this sounds like an interdisciplinary kind of topic, that introducing the history of Shakespeare, which I find fascinating. There's a lot of detail before going into all of his writings and his work.
So here's, just to preempt something that you might put on your sheets about what gets in the way. If you don't have the right frame of reference,
Right.
meaning is very difficult to get. Okay, sometimes the history is needed and helpful.
Yeah, that's our number 3.
That was our
Sometimes-
thing.
So we didn't
sometimes-
get a lot of the events that, it's period.
Well, because some of it is
Because what drives him, you know, what, understanding what
There's
drives him.
assumption of,
When was the book by?
Oh, it was at this time. I mean, there were times, we're gonna be working with sonnets in a little bit. The day is slipping away. I'm having fun incidentally, but that's why the day's slipping away. Sonnets were, most of Shakespeare's sonnets were written during a time when the theaters were shut down in London because of plague. And plague was a common thing. There were 2 major plague epidemics during Shakespeare's high times in London. And it happened earlier as well, but it certainly was in London at the time. And so they had, they didn't know why. I mean, it was just, people would die. And so they shut themselves up and only meet in small groups. And that's what the sonnets were about. But a very, very important insight here is that if you don't get the events, it's really hard to get the story. And to understand that in Shakespeare's time, everybody who went mean and humble all knew the story ahead of time. So if you're going to help people work through Shakespeare and enjoy Shakespeare, one of the first things you've got to do is tell them the story. They've got to get the good parts version in order to know it, okay? Because then they have a frame of reference, and you can give some background stuff. We'll have a piece of work on. Let me. It's 11 o'clock. It's 11:30, and my plan today was to do this. Was to give you an assignment to work over lunch and come back. I'm not gonna have time to set that up, so we'll do an assignment when you get back. In about a half hour, we should plan on breaking for lunch and coming back in about an hour. Does that work for you? Okay, 40 minutes to an hour, can you do that? Any problems with that? And then we'll work through, anybody planning on going home before 9 tonight? Oh. Let me share with you some observations, because there's many ways in which you guys absolutely get it. The language of Shakespeare is difficult if it's not delivered well. And to assign somebody the task of cold reading Shakespeare without any background or prep is a very, very difficult task. So here's how was Shakespeare received by audiences? It was delivered to them by professional actors who worked at the delivery, they worked together to tell the story and to present the story and the language of the story. Because the question I asked earlier, if it's true that people didn't go to Shakespeare to be surprised by the plots, what did they go for? Entertainment, distraction. They went to see, sorry, it's my brother. He can wait. He's an English teacher in New York. He's on vacation. That's going to be real annoying. They went for the wordplay. They went to be thrilled by the language, and they went to be moved by the emotions. And that's why people go to Shakespeare. So in order for that to be capable, you have to be able to get past I'm worried about the story. And I'll give you a piece of advice. That is, you should receive Shakespeare the same way I think you should receive Paris. Anybody been to Paris? I've never been to Paris. It's on my bucket list, okay? But most Americans go to Paris and give themselves a week. How long were you in Paris?
I was only there for 2 days because
2 days.
I was there for
I was there for 10 days.
10 days. 10 days is almost enough.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're there 2 days.
I was on a big.
You're on a tour.
A
You
big-
get on the bus. You get off at the
No,
Louvre.
I didn't do
you
a
get-
tour.
No, but
Yeah,
but
but yeah,
you
you
understand
have
the
to-
thing is you got 2 days in Paris. What am I going to do?
The
Eiffel Tower.
touristy things.
What am I going to do? I'm going to look at the Eiffel Tower. The line's too long. I don't have time to get up there. I'm going to stand at the Louvre. It's closed today. I'm going to sit in a cafe because I promised myself I'd do that. And the rain's taking too damn
Have a
long.
croissant.
And so Americans have this fault that they drive themselves on touring and vacationing because they treat it as if it's the last time they're going to get there. And you should treat Shakespeare like it's not the last time you're going to get there. So that the panic that people have about not getting it and getting lost because I don't get it is, I didn't get that this time. I don't have to get everything. So if I watch an episode of The Closer, which is a show I really enjoy the acting, I enjoy the repertory company, I enjoy the plots, but I expect them to deliver me an easily digestible product. And if they don't, I'm disappointed. The writing's not good, I say. But I have no desire to go back and watch it again. But Shakespeare, I will go over and over again because every time I see it, I get something else out of it. And this is, for me, because I'm teaching about Shakespeare, I'm using Shakespeare as a teaching device, the insight that every time I teach, I learn something about what I'm teaching. And that's part of the joy that keeps me going in teaching. I learn something from my students every time I interact with students, and that's part of what keeps me going. So let me get back to my PowerPoint and to reinforce many of the things that you were saying. I have a bunch of quotations, but this one I think is poignant, and it gives me an entree to a sonnet. I'm going to read this. I didn't know much about Shakespeare except these and thous. He couldn't possibly have anything to say that was relevant to my life. I put the book back under the table leg. After 3 more days of staring at Gray, I pulled it out again, muttering that Shakespeare was better than nothing. I won't pretend that Shakespeare and I immediately connected. I must have read those damn sonnets 20 times before they started to make sense. Even then, comprehension came slowly. First a word, then a phrase, finally a whole poem. Those sonnets began to take hold of me, transported me out of the gray world into a world I had never ever imagined. I called him Bill instead of William. We were, after all, quite close. He introduced me to the beauty of language, and I developed a real respect for the precision of his words. That book of sonnets didn't just change my opinion, it quite literally changed my mind. I discovered the magic of learning, the thrill of going from not knowing to knowing. By struggling, let me say that again, the thrill of going from not knowing to knowing. That's aha. By struggling to understand Shakespeare, I came to see that ideas have beauties all their own, beyond even the beauty of words that frame them. The words too fascinated me. I couldn't just run over the ones I didn't know, ignoring them. I had to look them up, learn to live with them. My real connection with Shakespeare started with a line in Sonnet 29, like to the lark at break of day arising. That sonnet, which became my favorite, was about me and my experiences as if Bill had sat down and looked into my heart. It's written by Carl Upchurch in a book called Convicted in the Womb. Carl Upchurch grew up in Philadelphia, in South Philly. By the time he was 23 years old, he had spent 12 years in prison, not continuously, off and on. He was a violent man, a black man who had no privileges or even expectation of privilege outside the violence of the streets of South Philly. And what he found, his connection with Shakespeare occurred after he had stabbed a fellow prisoner and was put in solitary confinement for 3 months. And in that cell was a book holding up a table leg. And it was Shakespeare's sonnets. And, all right, he had nothing else to do.
Good thing.
Right? Pardon?
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. He eventually earned a PhD. He became a social worker. He helped people to hold themselves up by the bootstraps. And his book, I recommend Convicted in the Womb. It's a moving book about his experience. So I want you to listen. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I, all alone, beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art or that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. And in that state, myself almost despising, happily then I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day, arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Okay, that's a sonnet. What makes that a sonnet? It's a poem form. It's got 14 lines. It's got a rhyme scheme. And most of Shakespeare's sonnets were written outside the context of plays. This particular, the sonnets are collected into a numbered group. They tend to be unrelated to each other. And this particular sonnet is well, you tell me, what is it about? When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, happily I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day, arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
Envy. It's beautiful.
Pardon?
Envy.
It's about envy.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What happens to the envy?
Well, then it goes away.
And he has the,
Appreciate
he has the
Somebody
aha.
loves, he lifts him up.
Love sings hymns at heaven's gates. Okay, so it's about change too. It's about it's not just I'm envious, which would get boring.
He doesn't like that. He's
Okay.
envious.
It's envious, and there's a way out. I can understand Carl Upchurch reacting to this. Okay, life sucks. My life has sucked. I don't have what they have, but there is somebody out there. I have a friend who hasn't seen his wife now in 22 years. She can't leave South Africa, and he can't go back for political reasons. They talk on the phone twice, sometimes twice a day. The phone bill's incredible. Okay, when he delivers this sonnet, he cries. I can get there too. For him. All right, so let me back off and talk about structure. There's 14 lines. They're grouped into 4, 4, 4, and 2. Okay, that adds up to 14. Alternate lines rhyme. Line A and line C rhyme. Okay, it's part of the difference. Sometimes those rhymes are forced, like possessed, least. Future like him, with friends possessed, desiring this one's art, let's go with what I most enjoy, contented. Least doesn't really rhyme with possessed. Okay. But the one of the things about that is the audience would hear that discord, and it would strike a note for them. Okay, they would expect to hear the rhyme, and it wouldn't happen. These happen to be iambic pentameter, which is what most of Shakespeare's poetry is written in, although not all of his work is poetry. A lot, common people, evil people, ugly people, people on the way down speak in prose. And there's one whole play, I've got a block in, Merry Wives of Windsor is entirely in prose, no poetry at all, except for a song near the end. What makes it iambic pentameter? Iambic means that the beat rhythm is da-da, and there are 5 of those da-das to a line. Da-da, 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 da-da. It's like a limerick almost. All right, so what, 14 lines. The last 2 lines rhyme. Brings kings. That's a traditional signature in Shakespeare. Typically, when 2 lines rhyme, it means the scene's over. They didn't have a curtain. They didn't have lights to blink. So, and sometimes he played with that. There's at least 2 plays in which a character does a rhymed couplet, and another character tops that rhymed couplet, and another character tops that rhymed couplet. And in one play, they actually say, "Oh, this is silly. Let's get over it and leave," because the audience would know that that was going on. All right, I want to call your attention to a couple of things about the way this is presented. I could have said this, I could have disclaimed this in a way that would have heightened the structure. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. That's doggerel, okay? I'm giving you the iambic and I'm punching the rhymes. It's almost never effective to do that with Shakespeare. The rhyme is there, the rhythm is there. It will happen if you speak the language. Your audience will hear it if you speak the language. That's not the point of the poem. The point of the poem is the meaning. And so, very often after Shakespeare, people added punctuation. Shakespeare was very haphazard with punctuation. But punctuation really helps you to understand what's going on in the sentence, And so you can ask this question, how many sentences are there in this poem? Now, what would you look for to answer that
Period.
question? Periods. There are no periods. I'll save you the time. So this is 14 lines of complex clauses. Okay, you know, if, I don't know if they did this to you, but somewhere around 5th grade, I was taught to diagram sentences
Yeah.
and let them hang down with clause after clause after clause. Look, modern writing style is much more direct and much more simple, and modern editors would prefer that you write short, succinct sentences rather than very long clauses. Shakespeare didn't have that editor. And so Shakespeare wrote very complicated clauses. And in order to be able to understand Shakespeare and develop an attitude towards how you're going to deliver this, you have to attend to where the clauses are, because they provide you with meaning. Okay, they provide you with an avenue to the meaning. So notice that "in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes" is a side comment. It's not part of the main clause. The clause is "when I all alone weep my outcast state." Do you see that? So that "in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes" has to be set apart so the listener knows it's not part of the main sentence. So how do you do that? You can't, well, you could do air quotes, but that's awkward, right? And actors wouldn't want to do that. So you use the tool that you have, and the primary tool that I'm displaying now is the voice. You can do it with motion also, but you can do it with the voice. So I have tools with my voice which have to do with volume and pitch and speed and pausing and those kinds of things. So listen carefully. "When, in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state." Do you hear the parentheses that I gave? By shifting gears and going, when the "I" goes back to the same vocal quality that the "when" went back to, started on. So "when, in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I," and get back to that same note. So finding parentheticals are some ways to get you to do this. There are lists of things that you can look for. Starting with about the 5th line, "wishing me like to one more rich in hope." That one is a person. It helps me when I deliver that to find somebody in the audience to be that person. And when I do that, it helps the people understand that I'm talking about a series of things, a series of people. "Wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art or that man's scope." And it gets you through all of those lines with that long, boring list. Okay, and then finally from this thing, there are some thoughts that should not be broken up. So when I get down to the place where I say, "yet in these thoughts myself almost despising," I know that that's the bottom emotionally in this piece. He's depressed, the speaker is down. Then in these thoughts myself almost despising, I now have to get out of that pit, and one way of doing it vocally is to get the pitch to go up. And one of the ways to make the pitch go up is to force it onto one breath. So, "yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day, arising from Solon's earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate." And I've got to do a diaphragmatic push to get hymns out, and it makes hymns go hymns. And it almost sings, you see. So they talk about really good poets writing in such a way. Stephen Sondheim writes lyrics that are designed for the singer's voice. Know what the singer has to do in order to get the lyric out, and so does Shakespeare. He knew what the vocal instrument needed in order to get this out. I'll give you one more example before we I've already given you all this advice. I'll give you 2 more examples. Vowels are are really the expressive opportunities in voice. The consonants are too short, okay, you can't extend them. But vowels you can extend with breath. So this is the beginning of a soliloquy from Hamlet. And it can be, that this too solid flesh should melt, fall, and resolve itself into a dew. Now, it's a beginning of us seeing Hamlet depressed, because in this soliloquy, what he's reflecting on is the fact that his mother had barely buried his father before she was in bed with his uncle. And he keeps going back to that image, but this is the first one. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about the vowels. That can't be, that this too solid flesh should melt. It's got to be, he's got it, that's a groan. And one of the things I hate about the way some local people, when I say local, I was going to say amateur, but it's a lot of professionals, that they think that the real trick is to show how fast they can say Shakespeare. And it's an insult. Sometimes fast is good, but it's not the point. The point is to get the story out and the emotion. And there's also a pun in there. And it's one of the things that people, if you leave a musical humming some of the tunes, and the next day you talk about the plot. Well, what would Shakespeare's theater goers talk about? They would talk about the word games that they discovered. So I'm not going to tease you with it. Watch this. That this too solid flesh should melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew.
I heard that the first time.
A dew is
Goodbye.
goodbye. En français. Okay. And so it sets up, it's not just that he's melting into a puddle. He's melting to suicide. His conquest. And the next line says, or that the everlasting's cannon had not set itself against self-slaughter. Just to reinforce that idea, he's thinking about saying goodbye. Okay, self-slaughter. So the emotion in the vowel sound. So let me try, we'll save two households for later. All right, I want to be sensitive about the time. We are not quite noon.
No,
Quarter of?
Yeah.
All right, so we have time for two. I wonder if I do this one first. Let me do this one. Let me ask you to listen again. Shift gears. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her. No, I know she lies. That she may think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. Thus, vaguely, does she think me young, although she knows my years are past the best. Simply I credit her false speaking tongue. On both sides then is simple truth suppressed. But wherefore says she not she's unjust? And wherefore say not I that I'm old? For love's best habit is in seeming trust, and age in love loves not to have years told. And therefore I do lie with her, and she with me, and in our faults, by lies, we flattered be. It's another sonnet? What's that about?
Is that about an older man that stays with his wife even though he knows that she is not faithful and that they are not compatible because of age? I don't know, where am I going?
Okay,
There's not
He's a lot
truth.
older than her.
he's a lot older than her.
Yeah.
There's not truth in their relationship, but
But
he's
on
going
both
with it
sides.
anyway.
On
They
both
don't,
sides.
they don't have the
He
same
says-
language. Or
They
he's
don't?
older and has more insight
He
or
wonders.
love that she doesn't understand. Or he's
Okay,
not
so
true.
I can get all of that, and I want to say, I hear you working it, and that was a one shot, you hadn't heard it before, okay, you don't know the context, but there's a lot of it that communicates, okay? So let me just show you, what I want to do with this is to talk with you about how I would go about preparing this. Okay, what am I going to look for? So this is the text. It's sonnet number CXXXVIII. So that's 138, okay, in the list of sonnets. And I ought to talk about this. What were the sonnets for? They were for fun. They were supposed to be entertainments. They were not, in Shakespeare's time, delivered from the stage. I said before, most of them were written during times of plague, and they were shared. Some of them were written on commission. Some of them were written for a particular purpose. And when the plague is out and you can't meet you can't watch the roosters kill each other, you meet at people's houses, close friends that you think are healthy. And what do you do when you meet at those houses? You sit around, you tell stories, you play musical instruments, you play silly parlor games, and somebody tells jokes. I've been to that party, right? And at Shakespeare's time, somebody would recite a sonnet.
Kind of a riddle.
It's quick.
Kind of a riddle.
It's a riddle,
like,
and it's got.
figure this out.
Figure this out. Here's something. Here's a great idea I had last night. No, okay. So I'm thinking that these were performed, maybe by the person who commissioned them, maybe by one of Shakespeare's actors who would come to a parlor gathering of people, maybe the palace, and deliver these. And so this is clearly the first person guy, and I just left that on there to show you. Here's the text. Okay, so when I'm approaching the text, and I learned this trick from James Earl Jones. We did a reading together, James Earl, myself, and about 10 other people. As a benefit for the Stratford Festival Theatre. It was held at Sacred Heart, this reading. And the way we prepare for these readings is that most of the parts will be played by local people who are part of our company. And then we'd get 2 or 3 famous actors to show up and act in it, because they would be the draw. Nobody would pay $10 to see me, but James Earl Jones, they'd pay $40 to
I
see.
love his voice.
You know,
He
he's got
narrates like kids' stories that I have. I just
great
love his voice.
And I have to tell you,
Just like John Henry. He's
I've
awesome.
met a lot of famous actors, and very few who are real gentlemen or gentlewomen, and he's one of them. James Earl Jones is an authentic human being. So the play that we were doing was a science fiction play, and it was set in the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan during a time when the entire Earth was surrounded by alien spacecraft, and they had destroyed most of New York except for the penthouse of the Waldorf Astoria, and the main characters are in there. And my part is I am the sentient computer who is in charge of the spaceships. And I got to say the immortal line, beam me up, what do you think, what the fuck do you think this is, Star Wars? And it was an intentional mistake in the thing, because Star Wars didn't have people beaming up, right? But it was supposed to be that kind of, it was the first time my mother heard me say that word. And at least that I know of. So the way we would do this is the local people would rehearse for a couple of weeks, because we didn't want to embarrass ourselves in front of the pros. And we would do these things on Monday night, because Broadway is dark on Monday. And so the pros would show up Monday morning, and we'd rehearse all day. We'd start at 8 in the morning, and we'd rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and we'd have a presentation at night. And we typically did it without blocking, so without movement, without action, without props, mostly sitting in place as if it were a radio play. James Earl Jones had a late minute obligation that day, and he could not show up until 3:30 on Monday. But he's a pro, so we sent him the script and told him to prepare by himself. We knew he would. And when we're all in our places, James Earl Jones shows up, the limo shows up, Channel 8 has the interview with him. He comes in, and we take our places, and the director says, okay, we're gonna take it from the top. And he cues the music, and James Earl Jones and I start delivering the same lines. Okay, let's try it again. Cue music, same thing. he had prepared the part that I had rehearsed.
Oh, no.
His part was God. What else would, who
Yeah.
else would cast be? He was gonna be God, he was gonna save the whole thing, and he had a very big part, but he had prepared the sentient computer. And so there's a conference with the director, and I hear James Earl Jones saying, "Let the rookie play his part." And he then went off by himself and did this to the script. Because he has a terrible problem stuttering. And that great voice, extemporaneously, mostly in conversation, is not a problem. But if he tries to do something in performance, he can't get it out unless he plans where he's going to breathe. So that's what this marking is. The slash marks are breaths. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. So I know that I'm going to breathe after believe her. Why do I want to breathe after believe her? Because there's a comma there. It's like singers know that you can breathe on the punctuation marks in the song, okay, because there's an actual pause there. You don't want to breathe. When my love swears that she is made of truth, okay, and you may have to practice to have enough breath to get to where the punctuation is, but that's part of the conditioning that you're doing. The parentheses mark parenthetical comments, where I have to shift gears. I do believe her, though I know she lies. That she may think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. Thus, vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past the best. Simply I credit her false-speaking tongue, on both sides thus, a simple truth suppressed. You see how it's, I'm trying to work into the meaning and play at the meaning along with the technique of breathing, because one of the worst things that can happen is you run out of breath and you tail off. You know, when my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies, that she may be some untutored. You know, it doesn't sound professional. Okay. So that's a very mechanical thing that I learned from James Earl Jones, which is my first place. And there's no trick. If you look at those breath marks, they're all at punctuation marks, because that's the clue. Okay.
What are the brackets?
The brackets are parentheticals where I'm going to change my pitch or my pace. When my love swears, I'll go down to another one. And age, in love, loves not to have ears told. So it's a parenthetical comment so that you don't stumble over the meaning of the words. And I have to tell you, it's very important. Find a subject, find a verb. So that you know what the sentence is about, okay? Thank you, fourth grade teacher. Okay. So now I go over the text again, and I don't always do this in typing, but this is for illustration. I'm looking for patterns. So I have italicized swears, truth, false, false, truth, trust, false, lies, lies, lies. Okay, so what's this about?
It's about, I get it now, I think. It's about the woman is in love with this older man. She feels that he's younger, even though he's not.
And she's willing to pretend that she's young, look past it, and he's willing to lie about it, because by their lying, they lie together.
Right.
Okay, and lying is a pun which you can play for, you know, that.
Right, lie or lie.
So, right, and so this helps me understand that the theme in this sonnet is about truth and falsehood, and the balance of truth and falsehood in this relationship. And I know there's an arc to it. I know there's going to be a place where the tension is going to build up, it's going to be relieved, and it happens in the third to last line. Well, actually, it happens in the last couplet, in the last two lines, because that's the therefore. Because of all these things. She swears, I believe her, but I know she lies, okay? There's